Hi VC, how you doing? Today I'm just going to do a response to Rob Walker's video. He started a thread on 10 songs about famous people, so just seemed like a good excuse to show some records. So here we go, in no particular order, 10 songs about famous people. And I'll start off with one that I think Rob would approve of. Get the impression he's a bit of a lefty on the quiet, or not so quiet. So going to go with Tramp the Dirt Down from Elvis Costello's Spike album. And that one is about Margaret Thatcher. And there's some pretty vociferous lyrics on there about how Elvis Costello hopes he lives long enough to see Margaret Thatcher die so he can tramp down the dirt on her grave. So yeah, guess he wasn't a big Thatcherite. And obviously that came out in 1989 before Margaret Thatcher was dead. So there you go. First of my 10. Then next up, a song from 1987, which was on Aerosmith's Permanent Vacation album. And that's the song Dude Looks Like a Lady, which was apparently written about Vince Neil, the singer from Motley Crue. Steven Tyler, I think, saw him in a bar and mistook him for a woman. Possibly it has as much to do with Steven Tyler being out of his brain on drugs and alcohol as it was to do with Vince Neil looking like a woman. That's equally true. But yeah, that's the origins of that song, apparently. Mind you, look at Vince Neil now and no one's going to mistake him for a woman. Okay. Next up, got a 7-inch here for half an hour. Stevie Wonder's Master Blaster, subtitled Jamming. And this was about Bob Marley. And came out in 1980. And it's basically Stevie Wonder's homage to the greatness of Bob Marley. I think he's totally inspired by the music that Bob Marley had been coming out with and wanted to pay tribute to him, to the man and to the type of music he was making. So there you go. Master Blaster, and there it is on the Motown label. Sad to think that only 4 years after that came out, which was a fantastic song, Stevie Wonder was coming out of crap like I Just Called to Say I Love You. Yeah, but hey. Something completely different now, and something which I don't have guilty pleasures, but there are some songs which just a little bit close to the knuckle, and I do have some problems with them. You'll see what I mean when I show you this. From Slayer's Rain in Blood album, it's the track Angel of Death. Now, taken as a piece of music, it's a fantastic, aggressive, game-changing piece of heavy metal, and sounds absolutely monstrous, and the whole album, all 29 minutes of it, is incredible. But when this came out, their record company, I think CBS distributed Def Jam recordings, and CBS refused to put this out. So I think it was Geffen who distributed it in the end. And it was because of the track Angel of Death, which is about Joseph Mengele, the butcher of Auschwitz. And I think the problem that the record company had with it is it seemed to glorify what Joseph Mengele had done. And Slayer have always denied that they're glorifying it. It's just, they see it as being more like a documentary. And be that as it may, it's still uncomfortable listening when you listen to the lyrics rather than just the music. And the blood-curdling scream that opens the track. It's quite a harrowing, well, a very harrowing song. And I certainly don't play it when my wife and kids are around because they would not appreciate it at all. Slayer have always hit back at the anti-Semitic suggestions, and to be fair, I'm not sure there's been anything else in their career which has really shown them out to be anti-Semitic or racist. In fact, they did do a song later in their career called Jihad, which sees the 9/11 attacks through the eyes of a jihadist terrorist. So that would certainly support their claim that they just almost do documentary type songs about these particular historical occasions. Fantastic song, uncomfortable subject matter. But there you go. And something a little bit lighter. It's The Sweet and their track Alexander Graham Bell, which is about Alexander Graham Bell. I tried to choose songs which don't just have the name of the famous person in the title, but one or two do inevitably. Of course, Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, or was one of the people who claimed to have invented the telephone. There's some dispute over who got the patent in first. There's a Scottish inventor. He invented the telephone and got patented in 1876. First words he ever spoke on the telephone were, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." And Mr. Watson was in the room next door, so he could probably just shout it, but it worked anyway. But the song itself is about two lovers who are 2,000 miles apart before the invention of telephone, wondering how on earth they're going to tell each other how they feel about one another. And then along comes Alexander Graham Bell. Great little pop track, a precursor to the heavier, more rocking Sweet that we got to know in the 70s, particularly on the B-sides. So there you go. Great stuff, The Sweet. And now another 7-inch. And this one is one that caused a bit of controversy when it came out in 1980. And it's Thin Lizzy's Killer on the Loose. And this is about Jack the Ripper. But they released this at a time when the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, was at large and killing quite a number of women, particularly in the north of England. So I don't remember whether this did get a BBC ban, but I imagine it did. And it certainly caused a fair bit of stink at the time when it came out. But it's a great song. And it comes from a great album. Chinatown's one of my favourite Thin Lizzy albums. So there you go, Jack the Ripper. And here we have one, which is quite a rare album actually. It's by a band called Toy Matinee, who with the brainchild of a guy called Kevin Gilbert, who he gives you lead and background vocals on here, plays guitar and keyboards. And the song on here that I'm highlighting is Turn It On Salvador, which is about Salvador Dali. In fact, the model on the front there has a bit of a Salvador Dali moustache going on. And Salvador Dali, of course, was one of the surrealist artists, and the lyrics on the track are pretty surreal themselves. It's hard to understand what's going on, but it's about Salvador Dali. It's a great song. This is a fantastic album. If you're not familiar with it, you should try and check it out online or something. It's really intelligent, progressive pop. One of the great, almost unknown albums released in the 90s. Kevin Gilbert was a huge talent. He was dating Sheryl Crow at the time this album went out, and he basically gave her big break. He took her out on tour as the keyboard player when he was promoting this album, and in fact wrote most of the lyrics on her debut solo album, the Tuesday Night Music Club. And once she found her own fame and fortune and they were separated, she didn't give him any credit whatsoever for the leg up he gave her career. So I think that kind of pissed him off a fair bit, as you can imagine. He died at 29. He did a Michael Hutchence and died as a cause of autoerotic asphyxiation. So interesting character. This is a fantastic album, and Turn It On Salvador is a great track. Then 7-inch EP now, and I'm concentrating on the track Mrs. Robinson by Simon and Garfunkel. And I mean, this is a fantastic EP as well. 4 superb tracks on there, all of which appear on the soundtrack to The Graduate, which is kind of how the track Mrs. Robinson came about, because Paul Simon had written a song called Mrs. Roosevelt, and it was about Eleanor Roosevelt, the former First Lady of the United States. And when Mike Nichols, the director of The Graduate, was trying to find music for his film, he approached Paul Simon, and Paul Simon just thought that doing movie music was a complete sellout, and quite difficult to convince him to contribute. But eventually he did, contributed quite a few songs to the soundtrack, and they were lacking one song. And Paul Simon happened to mention he had this song called Mrs. Roosevelt. As you know, one of the characters in The Graduate is called Mrs. Robinson, and it didn't take a great leap of imagination to change the title of the song. So it's really about Eleanor Roosevelt, but it's called Mrs. Robinson, and that's the story of the song. Then next up we have Kansas and their Point of No Return album, and the song on here called Portrait He Knew, which is actually about Albert Einstein. And Kerry Livgren apparently was a huge fan of Albert Einstein. Are you a fan of a scientist, a philosopher? I don't know. A great admirer of him. And the song is written about Kerry Livgren wondering basically what secrets Einstein took to his grave, because apparently he was working on some great scientific theory at the time he died. In fact, was trying to tell his nurse some of his ideas as he was dying in hospital, but she didn't understand German. So his sort of final game-changing theory went to the grave with him. So yeah, well worth checking out. I mean, I love Kansas anyway, and this is a great album, but the track Portrait He Knew, a really good one, well worth checking out. And then finally, a fairly obvious one, but why not? So Bowie's Hunky Dory and the track Andy Warhol. This came out in 71. Possibly my favourite Bowie album. Certainly the album that got me into Bowie. I'd heard him before, was never that crazy about him, but I heard this album, thought, yeah, this is a bit different. In fact, it was hearing Fish from Marillion on the radio talking about some of his favourite albums, and they played the track The Bewley Brothers off this album, and he was raving that whole album. I thought, that's a great track, got to track that down. So yeah, thanks to Fish from Marillion, I got into Bowie in this album. But yeah, the track Andy Warhol, Bowie had written it, and Andy Warhol came in the studio while they were recording Hunky Dory, and Bowie played him the track, and Warhol didn't like it. I think he thought he was taking the piss out of him a little bit. I mean, certainly with lines like, he'll think about paint and he'll think about glue, what a jolly boring thing to do, does sort of trivialise what Warhol was doing a fair bit. And legend has it that Warhol left the studio in a huff, but not before telling David Bowie how much he liked his shoes. So yeah, Andy Warhol from Bowie's Hunky Dory. So that's my 10. Leave your comments. Have a go at coming up with your own 10 as well, because I've not seen too many responses to Rob's thread. Perhaps people are struggling to think of 10 famous people in songs, but they are out there. It just takes a bit of digging. Okay, back with another video soon. See you. Bye for now.